Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that went through all the Friday the 13th movies, 13 minutes at a time, and now we're going through the fan films. My name was Brian.
And I'm period piece Greg, so beware of bears.
This episode, we are going to be going through the 2021 fan film His Name Was Jason, which I think is about Jason Bateman, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool, I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
We can turn this into a spin-off of Smartless.
Or an Arrested Development prequel.
I like that this movie was dedicated to Steve Dash. I'm sure that his family was touched.
Especially 3 years after the fact that he died, but yes.
The cold open is a nice drone shot of a police car winding its way along a rural road. And I mean, I couldn't tell if it was just like my streaming bit rate or something, but was he driving next to the lake? Or was it just like this foggy bank of weird mist?
I had the same exact reaction, and I think it's like CGI fog.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, but it was because it was so pixelated from the rest of the image that I couldn't tell if it was just like a rendering issue on YouTube or if it was just kind of like a chintzy special effect. I'm leaning toward kind of like artificially placed fog to kind of create some atmosphere for this opening shot.
Yeah, and it was behaving oddly too. So it was kind of taking me out of it, but I think it might have been meant to evoke the idea that there was a lake alongside this roadway and the mist was coming off the lake, and they, for whatever reason, couldn't shoot near an actual body of water. I don't know.
I do think we need to start a drinking game because with these fan films, because
I'm on board.
because I think every single one of them has opened with a drone shot. So we just need to keep track of drone shots that we see in these fan films and take a drink if you're listening or watching at home.
So the police car pulls up to a crime scene, and there's a couple of trucks and some people milling around with some caution tape and activity focused around kind of a pathway off into the wilderness. And there's a slightly vintage vibe going on here. There's no chyron that tells us when this is taking place, but there's something about the way everyone looks in the vehicles that makes me think it's not present day.
Yeah, and we can get into that in a little bit because I didn't necessarily pick up on that, but I had some questions later on about when this was taking place. But yeah, they're kind of like vintage cars, and there's nothing really being shown that would suggest that it's necessarily happening today. But yeah, I kind of liked the setup. It's kind of like one of those old classic police cars, and he pulls up, and it's like, I don't know, there's maybe like a dozen people that are standing in this field, and clearly something has happened, but it kind of set kind of a cool tone right from the beginning. I think it was original music too, which I liked, but yeah, we're not quite sure what's going on just yet.
Yeah, there was definitely like a kind of a quirky soundtrack, but it's a pretty standard like, oh, it's happening again kind of punch to this cold open, and then we cut into the credits. Which were very obviously inspired by the movie Seven. Just
what makes you say that?
Yeah, right. Although some of the text effects that they used were Microsoft PowerPoint level, like, you know, swooshies, or like the little like kind of dream sequency kind of, which made me laugh. But you know, I mean, okay, it was. I'm not sure that approach. You know, Seven came out in 1995, I think. And if they are going for some sort of throwback vibe to this movie, that's a little bit of an anachronism. They should have gone with something more period authentic. But, okay.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on the Seven vibes. But there's some cool little things. I mean, you're getting the standard kind of story setup. Images in magazine or like newspaper cutouts and stuff. And there's two, I'm assuming they are photoshopped for this production because I don't recall seeing them before, but there's two really quick shots of young Jason that I took screenshots of, and I can post them online after the episode airs. But there's one of Jason kind of, Swamp Boy Jason kind of hiding behind a tree. That's really interesting. But then the one that cracked me up was this vintage photo from it. The little handwritten caption on the Polaroid says 1953 Jason, and it's this little boy dressed in like pleated dungarees and a buttoned up shirt, and he's sitting on the hood of a vintage car, and it's a sepia tone image, but it's got Swamp Boy head Jason.
Right, it's got the hydrocephalic head. Yeah. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to figure out if there's a way I could make it like my wallpaper on my phone or something, because
or if we can like recreate it for a Christmas card.
Because it actually is really good. I mean, even with the screenshot up on that I'm looking at right now, like whoever did the photoshopping did a really good job, because it really looks like a vintage photo. But I just like the little touches of personalization of like, hey, here's this little boy Jason, and we learned that the movie is about Jason Voorhees and not Jason Bateman, unfortunately. A couple of things I wanted to point out in the credits was that I just thought was more interesting than anything was that it starts off by saying it's a film by Dave Brown, but then I was surprised to see that it was directed by Jason West. And Greg, I can see you're nodding your head, so maybe we're on the same page here. But I've always been under the impression that a film by is typically a credit that's reserved for someone who is the screenwriter and the director of the movie. So like Heat is a Michael Mann film. Almost Famous is a Cameron Crowe film.
John Carpenter.
Right. And so to find
James
out
Cameron, yeah.
Yeah, so to find out that Dave Brown is just the story by, and I think also just one of the screenwriters. I think there may have been two screenwriters. And then
but he's the executive producer too.
Okay. So maybe he can just give whatever credit he wants. But I was just surprised to see that, because when it said a film by Dave Brown, I immediately made the secondary note of it's directed by Dave Brown. And
right.
Then I saw that it was Jason West. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting.
Backspace. Yeah, that was, I mean, it's typically reserved for like the auteur philosophy of filmmaking. So I too was, I had that very note. And that's why I was nodding my head. So,
and then the other thing is, it says that the original music is by the Bourbon Crows, and bourbon is spelled wrong. And at first, I didn't think much of it, because I thought maybe that's just the spelling that they chose. But jumping ahead a little bit here, but in the closing credits, it says the music is by the Bourbon Crow, and bourbon is spelled correctly and crow is singular. So I think it's just a pretty significant typo in the opening credits.
You might want to get a proofreader on these next time.
Yeah.
We then cut to the main story, and the very first question I have for you is, who the fuck thinks it's a good idea to open a Jason movie with a long chat over coffee in a diner?
There is so much to say about this scene, and not just because it's seemingly 2.5 hours long, but
I'm making fun of Brian because that was the way that he originally scripted the first scene of our season 13 fan film that we wrote.
That we wisely moved to, I don't know, the third or fourth scene or something. But yes, point taken. But yeah, there's some funny stuff to talk about with this scene. So I am pretty sure it's the diner from part 1.
I think it is.
So that's pretty cool. But we start off with two, we don't really know their profession yet. They're kind of like truckers or just everyday guys eating breakfast.
Blue-collar dudes.
Yeah.
Blue-collar dudes.
And I refer to one of them as John Deere because he's wearing a John Deere hat, and I refer to the other one as Moonshine because he's wearing some hat that says Moonshine on it. But they're eating breakfast, and they're talking about someone named Mickey, who's like a coworker or buddy of theirs who's running late. But they go on. We get so much backstory, exposition, but it just kind of like goes in circles. It's kind of like two things that they're covering. It's like they're not in high school anymore. They're getting old, and Mickey doesn't have his act together. And it's just they keep going back to these 3 points over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I want to, at this point, I want to sum this up unlike the screenwriter, by saying that there's a lot about this movie that I like, and I think that they did some interesting things. But there is absolutely no reason this movie was 80 minutes long, for the reason you just said.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There is so much just
Beating a dead horse.
Yeah, conversation that just
beating a dead horse would be a cool thing for Jason to do. We never see that happen.
Yeah, they're just going on and on talking about their life stories, and it's funny because like they start to go into such detail that is not going to be relevant to the overall story. And there's something about like the big game that one of these guys played in. Like, first of all, these guys are like in their late 40s. So it's not like they're 10 years out of high school and they're still reminiscing. Like, there's no reason why these guys should be talking about high school the way they are. Or
yeah, I mean, it's like one guy acts like he stole the ball from Brett Favre at a Bengals game or something. And, it was the highlight of his life.
They're just going on. But it's actually amusing, just because they keep going back and forth with it.
They were there for so long talking that I thought it would be awesome if Jason walked in and ordered breakfast.
Well, no, they were talking so long that Jason would have come in and ordered dinner.
Fair point.
So there's really nothing of importance that happens here other than the introduction of the characters. But there's one thing I wanted to point out, and it's there was this shot that they kept going back to, and it was the close-up of Moonshine. So if you're looking at them like head on, Moonshine was the dude that was sitting on the right. And on the wall behind him, there's this long list of like 8.5 by 11 paper that's like taped to each other. So it's like, top to bottom, it's like sheet of paper taped to the bottom, another sheet, another sheet, another sheet. And on those sheets is some pretty large typed copy, and there's some highlighted spots every like 5 or 6 lines, and you can't see it because of the resolution. Like, you can't really figure out what it says, but it doesn't make sense for it to be hanging where it is in this diner, or anywhere in the diner for that matter. And I'm wondering if it's the script for the scene.
I was just gonna say that.
That they maybe didn't I don't know how they couldn't have realized it was in the back of the shot, because it is in a prominent location in the shot. But I'm really wondering if, like, because this scene was so long and they sat there for so long, that they just had the script hanging up on the wall so you could just turn around and look to see what your next line was.
Or like so the script supervisor could follow along and make sure they covered all the ground over and over again.
Exactly, because it definitely wasn't like a menu or something that belonged in the diner. But because we were on the scene for so long and we kept going back to that shot, I was like, is that the script? Like, did they just hang the script on the wall and forget that you could see it in the shot?
They are finally joined by their friend Mick, who I'm fairly sure is Jimmy Fallon dressed up for a Wayne's World skit at an SNL alumni reunion.
I would say most of the characters, I mean, there's not a lot of characters in this movie, but most of the characters seem very realistic and grounded, even though they kind of have some weird hang-ups. They seem like normal people. But yeah, Mickey walks in and he's just like, who is this guy?
And he's proudly sporting a Happy Days Fonzie t-shirt. So that was another thing that like kind of led me to think, wait, this has to be taking place in the past.
Right, yeah, that was the first indication. And then the other weird thing about this scene that I think could potentially be part of a larger drinking game is the guy that walks in with the Letterman jacket on. And it's this African-American guy wearing a Letterman jacket, and his name is Bugsy. And I had to pause it for a second. I'm like, wait a second. Because I was like, what? I can't remember. Was it Vengeance? The Friday the 13th? One of them,
yeah. I forget which one, but right, I know where you're going.
One of the past fan films we watched, not too long ago, maybe 1 or 2 ago, I think it was Vengeance, had a character named Bugsy. He was this African-American guy wearing a Letterman jacket, and I looked up and realized that it's the same actor that plays the same character in the Friday the 13th video game, and he's showing up doing the exact same thing in here. And I don't know if I really have a problem with it. I think it's kind of cool that this guy
Is it
just
literally
starts,
the same guy
it
playing
is
in
the
both?
same guy.
I love it. I
Yeah, it's the
absolutely
same
love it.
actor. And so it's like, I don't know if he just calls all these.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious that it's like this Easter egg that he just, I hope he shows up in every fan film from now on.
Absolutely, and he's like the hinge point of the multiverse. So he's in all of these, and he's playing, and he knows all of the stories. So I mean, he's like the I can't even think of the Marvel Cinematic Universe analog, but he's like Doctor Strange Prime, who knows everything that's going on in all of the stories.
Right. Because all these all these fan films are taking place in different times and eras, and so it just would be funny if he just slips in and out.
Yeah, he's Alpha Wayman from Everything Everywhere All at Once.
But yeah, I cracked up, and like that is his appearance in the movie. He doesn't do anything else, but I'm totally fine with that. I love the idea that that this is going to be like this Easter egg that's going to just pop up, and that not only are the filmmakers thinking of doing this, but that the actor is game for doing it.
Yep. Now we just need Battle Chad to show up in every one of these movies. The other thing that made me laugh is that I don't know if he came with Mick or arrived shortly after, but like the other town crazy. We do get a Crazy Ralph reference at one point in this movie, but there's like, obviously because Walt Gorney is dead, they have to have a different crazy guy. And this other town crazy comes in, and his name is Mac. So we have Mick and Mac. And I'm like, guys, I mean, it's one vowel. Just change a different name altogether. Like, that was weird.
Aside from all the high school reminiscing that these two guys are doing, they also give Mickey the hardest time about ordering a bran muffin. It's like there's like 5 minutes of ribbing and jokes just over the fact that he ordered a bran muffin for breakfast, and it's
and
almost,
again, he's in his late 40s. That's a great idea. Like, Mickey's got the right idea.
And I think that, looking back, is also kind of like an indicator of the time frame that this is happening, because I think there was this mentality where it's like, oh, you eat healthy, like you must be a pussy, or something like that. And so the fact that he was ordering a bran muffin while the other guys were eating steak and eggs or something
or whatever. Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it went on, and there's even a joke later on in the movie about the bran muffin. It's like, guys, we get it. Like, it's just a bran muffin. Let it go.
Yeah, and this really establishes the biggest annoyance for me with this movie, which is I don't get why these guys are friends. Like, they do not seem to like Mickey at all. I mean, they are just constantly berating him for everything. And, granted, he seems like kind of a doof, and he's late, and he, drops the ball. But, I mean, I don't get why they hang out with him.
Yeah, there's other things that we'll bring up throughout the conversation. But, yeah, they're definitely not friends. And then the last thing that they're talking about in the diner, which only comes up like 35 or 40 more times throughout the movie, so I want to make sure I bring it up now, is that the town of Crystal Lake is going to shit. And they harp on that so much. And so, like, basically the premise, like, we're making fun of this conversation, and we should, but like the gist of the conversation is that there's these three guys. There's John Deere, there's Moonshine, there's Mickey. Mac doesn't really play a part in the story moving forward, but they are these like blue collar guys. They're having a hard time finding work because the town of Crystal Lake is going to shit. And the reason, depending on who you ask, has either something to do with the legend or factual events of Mrs. Voorhees and to a lesser degree, Jason Voorhees. And other people are just like, nah, it's just a sign of the times. The town's just going downhill and there's nothing we can do about it. So they're just having a hard time finding work, and they're just constantly harping on whether the fact that they should stay in town, like, they've been here their whole lives. They went to high school here and all that stuff. Should they stay here, or should they just pack up and leave and find work elsewhere? Because they're struggling to find a good living here.
Yeah, I mean, they've structured this as like this little triumvirate of friends, and it's sort of like like Star Trek, where Kirk, Spock, and Bones represent different facets of personality. And these guys, these three dudes, they're down on their luck. All three are down on their luck, but John Deere is trying to recapture his glory days, and he's kind of the swinging dick, toxic masculinity guy. You know, Mickey is kind of the free spirit goofball who seems a little bit um, like he hasn't grown up all the way. And then, you know, Moonshine is I think he's a small business owner, and he's the more practical one, and he's just struggling to make ends meet.
It's the other way around. So John Deere is the dude with the beard. And then
Okay.
and then the big dude is Moonshine. He's the one that like was the football star and got hurt.
Got it.
And,
Okay.
you know, all that. Yeah.
Okay.
But
in any case, yeah. So John Deere is the practical shop owner who is struggling to make ends meet and keep his employees, you know, in the black, and Moonshine is trying to recapture his youth. And I kind of like that structure. I think it's a realistic group. It's just I don't really get that they're friends.
not at all. No.
The other thing that was funny is that Crazy Mac brings up this facet of the legend that we've never heard before, which is that the idea that Pamela Voorhees has been reincarnated as this gigantic male deer named Buster, who is sort of like the fish that got away. Everyone wants to catch this, you know, this big fish. Everyone wants to hunt this big buck deer that's been running around, but no one can ever bag him. And so it's just like, what?
I mean, I'm just hoping that this Crystal Lake TV series shows that transformation from
amazing
killer mother to elusive buck.
Yes, that's what it's going to be, like Tusk, but it'll be Antler. You know, I think there was a movie called Antlers, but it'll be Pamela Voorhees, you know, metamorphosing into the 10-point buck that runs around haunting the hillsides.
Right. The story is ridiculous. And I know it's supposed to be, well, I think it's supposed to be a metaphor, but I think Mickey is taking it as factual, and that this deer that's running around that people can't seem to capture or kill is really Mrs. Voorhees somehow. And so the more he starts to talk about it, the dumber it sounds. Like if he had just kind of like hypothesized just very quickly, it's like, well, you know, who knows? Maybe the deer is Mrs. Voorhees, like, and just left it at like that. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. But he goes into so much detail. It's like, wait, does he really think that she's a deer now? Like, is that what we're supposed to think?
I mean, the good news is it has no bearing on the plot, so you really can just forget about it.
Yeah.
They leave. You know, they've finished their breakfast, and they leave for this. They have some like kind of day gig lined up where they're going to get paid a couple $100 to fix a fence, and so they file out of the diner, and off screen someone is walking in, and they say, "Oh, hey, Ralph," and that was a cute moment.
I liked it because there was a little bit of a ding ding from his bicycle bell.
Right.
And so like it interrupts their conversation.
Yes. However, the ding ding of his bicycle was a great touch, but it was undercut by the fact that the door to the diner dings. So I didn't realize it was his bicycle at first.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on that. I just, like, they were talking about something, and then they were interrupted by ding ding, and someone turns off camera and goes, "Oh, hey, Ralph." And I thought,
I loved that. I thought
yeah,
it was great. And that was another clue that this was taking place, you know, further back in the past than I realized.
Yeah.
And then we cut to what is this movie's stock in trade, which is long conversations in the front seat of a vehicle, but they're not driving because they obviously couldn't afford to have, have the vehicle be towed while they were, you know, filming or whatever. So it's just people waiting to start the car, but having a full conversation before they drive away.
There's something, there's a lot of like repeated conversations in here, and kind of just elements of conversations that'll come up over and over again. A lot of it's about reliving your youth and things like that, but
which we're not doing, talking about these movies at all.
No,
so.
Not at all. Not at all. There is a moment where, so, and again, we try not to be critical about the the production quality of these fan films because we understand limited resources. We're just going to say, in the kindest way possible, that the acting in this movie is not great. It's subpar, but, and we can get into this later too, I think that's one of the charming elements about the movie. But because of the less than stellar acting, there's some line deliveries that don't necessarily pack the punch that they're intended to. And there was one where like it's the same scene where they're sitting in the truck, and I forget how it comes up, but John Deere, so he's the bearded guy, he's like, this town needs a redemption. And then Moonshine, who's like the bigger like football playing dude, looks off into the distance and goes, you took the words right out of my mouth. And then when someone presses him further, he's like, oh, nothing, I'll tell you later. And it's like a moment out of the room where it's just like one of these like stilted conversations where it's like he's planting a seed, but it's done so unnaturally that it's just like, oh my God, just fucking tell us what you're thinking. Right. Let's not drag this out any longer. But yeah, the delivery of it was like, you know, he has this idea of how they can redeem the town, but he's just not quite ready to tell it yet.
There's one facet of this conversation, because I want to praise this movie where I can. There, like I said, there are some things about this movie that I really like. And this conversation has the first one. I really like the idea that everyone in town blames the Christies for screwing things up for everyone. That, like, you know, well, why'd they have to reopen the camp after what happened in 57, 58? You know, that was a bad idea. Like, I think that's great that they just... The bad fortune this town has endured is because of the Christie family. Nice touch.
It's the smartest take that you can really have on something like this, because it's so easy to blame Pamela Voorhees, but it's like, no, go a step back and say, like, we never wanted this camp in the first place, and this family opened it, and then look what happened, and we told you we didn't want it. And so yeah, I do like that touch, and it's something that at least we haven't heard vocalized directly like that before. And so I thought that was a nice angle of where to kind of focus the blame for what happened.
Yeah, and this is where I started to piece together that this film is set after the events of the original movie and before the events of part 2. So somewhere in that 5-year span, we don't know whether Alice has been killed yet, but it's definitely after Steve Christie reopened the camp and there were more murders. And so that really like drove the town into ruin. And I thought that was great. That was what I want from fan films, is to set them in eras and tell stories kind of between the other movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think there's a few references where, well, I would say most of the references about the legend of Camp Crystal Lake revolve around Mrs. Voorhees in this movie. And they do mention Jason from time to time, but I don't think they ever talk about Jason killing people. It's more just like they say Jason didn't die and that he might still be out there. Like that's all they really know about him. So yeah, this is very much reacting to the events of part 1 and Pamela Voorhees.
So this crew is now out at a farm, somewhere located somewhere nearby, and they're fixing this fence. And a detail that made me laugh is that it's supposed to be hot because everyone's sweating and wiping their foreheads, but Mickey is wearing a down vest. So, like, dude, take it off.
This is where we get the first of 25 reminders that Moonshine's knee is bothering him. And I think they make a mention to, so yeah, like they fix this fence in the farm, but there's a mention about chickens being dead, like a bunch of chickens being slaughtered, and they don't know what happened, and they don't think it was an animal that got in, but just some kind of alluding to the fact that someone got in and killed all these chickens, and they don't know who or why that would have happened. But Moonshine says that he wants to go have a beer because he wants to go run this idea by his friends, this one that he just brought up 5 minutes ago. So they all, like, I guess, reluctantly agree to eventually go to this bar.
Yeah, they pile back into the truck and sit for another 10 minutes having a conversation before they're startled by Uncle Jesse, who is the owner of the barn. thanks them for their hard work, and they pull away to head to the bar, and Moonshine looks in the rearview mirror for some reason and catches a glimpse of Sackhead Jason peering out of the barn. And we immediately cut into classic Harry Manfredini score, which I have to admit kind of disappointed me. I liked where this movie had been going with its soundtrack before this. And so to cut right into a needle drop of actual film score was like, well, okay, I get it, but...
Needle drop is a good way to describe it, because it was kind of alarming. Because, I mean, we're not that far into the movie. I think we're maybe like 10 minutes in. But
I thought we were like 90 minutes in already.
But we hadn't heard any original, in terms of like the Friday the 13th franchise, like Harry Manfredini music. We hadn't heard anything like that. So when it finally popped up, I was like, oh, yeah, I had a very similar reaction to you. It just didn't, it felt out of place, oddly. Mm-hmm. And, but yeah, at least we get our first shot of Jason, and he's the part 2 Jason that we are familiar with seeing in terms of the overalls and the sack head. So I thought he looked pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, a little more hulking than part 2 Jason. Like we said at the time, Steve Dash was a big dude, but for some reason, the way that movie was shot, it made him look a little bit diminutive. And I always kind of liked that Jason was this like little shrunken, tough, muscular, but like little homunculus running around the woods. And here he's obviously a taller, bulkier guy. But, that's what Jason has become. So that's consistent. As the dudes drive away, we get a scene of Uncle Jesse in the barn getting killed with a comical shriek. As Jason hooks him with one of those like hay bale hook things, which yeah, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. We then end up at the bar, and it's
after they drive past the Moravian cemetery again.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah,
I didn't catch that.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay, so we at least know where they are. Yeah, I didn't see that. So they end up at this bar, and
which it's kind of a weird bar. It's like in a motel, but it looks like you go into one of the motel rooms. Like there's not like a big front entrance to this bar, but I think it's real because I mean when they walk in, the set is fleshed out behind them, and I mean you see neon and you see people drinking and stuff. So I think it's a real location, but it's just a very strange establishment.
It is weird. It doesn't look like a traditional bar. It like you said, it's a motel lodge bar or something, and it's kind of like a log cabin-ish on the inside, but it doesn't feel like a bar, and it also doesn't look like a motel. So it's just like it's a strange setting. But the three of them are well, actually, it's the two of them go in first, and then John Deere gets pulled outside by, I guess, like a waitress or a bartender, and
who says, let's go over here and talk, and they move 3 feet
yeah,
before they have their conversation.
And we get our 10th lecture so far about how the town is going downhill, and I guess this woman's husband is having a hard time finding work, and she wants to know if John Deere can hire him on at his store. We never really, I don't think we get an idea of what this store is. It's kind of like a, I don't know, bait and tackle or general store or something like that.
I think it's a hardware store.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I think so. So
she is asking if her husband can get some work there, and John Deere is like, no, there's just not enough work to go around. And it doesn't really tell us anything that we didn't already know. Like, we already know that the town is struggling and people are having a hard time finding work. So it's just like yet another reminder that this is happening.
We're relitigating the economic impact that Pamela Voorhees has had on this town.
Right.
But we established that this takes place before 1990. So that's what really locked in for me, that this takes place between parts 1 and 2.
Right.
Which I love.
Yeah, because that's when I actually stopped for a second, because there was a comment in there, yet another conversation about how the town was going to shit. And one of them says, like, Crystal Lake's going to be an empty shell by 1990. And I even like paused it and I was like, huh. And I had to kind of like think back and go, because up until this point, I was just assuming it was taking place in present day. I hadn't really been thinking about the actual time frame. But then when they said, by 1990, I go, oh, well, then that makes sense. And then I started thinking back to all the previous scenes and thought, yeah, it tracks. Like this is all, Crazy Ralph was there and there's no cell phones and things like that. So I'm like, okay, so now we know where we are. It's like the 80s probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be before 1984 because that's when the events of Part 2 take place.
True.
So it's, sometime between 1979 and 1984. And we learned that Moonshine's big idea to revitalize the town is for the three of them to go out at 5 o'clock in the morning and hunt down that 10-point buck that we were talking about earlier. And this will be such a gigantic media event that it will put Crystal Lake back on the map, even though the deer has already been killed, so no one will give a shit because they can't go in and hunt the deer themselves.
It's a very muddled plan, first of all, but also legend or story. So like there is one detail that we didn't really touch on, which is the reason why this deer has been so elusive and has not been killed is because it tends to always venture into the woods near Camp Crystal Lake. And people are afraid to follow the deer into the woods because of what happened at Camp Crystal Lake. That's kind of cool. Like I totally buy off on that idea of this like silly like town legend. You don't need to make the deer Mrs. Voorhees to make that legend work. It's just like this elusive deer and it goes in the woods and no one wants to follow it. Fine. So Moonshine's plan, like you said, is to kill this deer. And then the rest of the group is reluctant because they're like, that means we've got to go into the woods near Camp Crystal Lake. And we don't want to do that.
But I still don't really understand how bagging the deer is going to draw all this interest into the area, because it would be more like, hey, we should set up a contest where people have to hunt down the deer for a prize. And like once it's already dead, no one else is going to give a shit. So
right.
Is it like the biggest deer in the world? Is it like a 40-foot tall deer that'll be on That's Incredible or something? I don't get why Moonshine thinks this is going to make any sort of impact on their fortunes.
Well, same for John Deere, because he was talking about mounting the head in his store to attract customers. And I'm just thinking, how?
No, he meant like mounting it sexually. Like he would get up on it and
then that would absolutely attract customers.
For like a geek show kind of.
It's like the pony show from Clerks 2 at movies.
Right. The donkey show from Clerks 2, exactly.
Right. It just doesn't make sense. Like he's like, oh, I'll mount the head at my store and it'll attract customers. And I just don't understand like why anyone would care. They're going to walk in and be like, oh, that's the deer that they couldn't kill. Like there's no resolution to any story. Like it's not like Mrs. Voorhees is dead. Like not
right.
Really.
Now I have to confess at this point, to the surprise of no one that's listening to this, I don't know a lot about hunting culture. For all I know, there might be a segment of the population that like wants to go see a kick-ass deer trophy because like, holy shit, that thing is huge. I admire the skill it took to hunt that down. Like that might be a thing, and fair game. Like I don't understand it, but I don't, you do you. I don't know that it's going to save the town. Like, because you're not paying to go see this thing. You're going to the hardware store. Maybe you'll pick up some stuff while you're there. But I don't feel like that this is a foolproof plan to turn everyone's lives around.
No. They're taking this idea a little bit too far, but whatever.
And then the other reason this movie is 80 minutes long is that we get a really slow, lingering pan of everyone else at the bar as these guys leave. And it lasts, I feel like, 90 seconds.
At least, yeah. But we do get to my absolute favorite part of the movie. in this next scene, which is
The
when,
part where the dickhead turns the light on in his bedroom at 5 a.m. and then leaves with the light still on.
well, it's part of that. It's the song that's playing in the background.
The song that's about us.
I have so many of the lyrics written down here, and Greg, you can let me know if you want me to make an attempt at singing this song because I went back and forth.
Read it like a poem.
Okay. Like, because we may even find a way to like post the audio or something. You know, if I feel like it, maybe I'll drop the audio from the song in here because
this is sort of like the ninja band from Miami Connection. It is amazing.
It's kind of like in the style of Poison's Every Rose Has Its Thorn. It's got this very kind of like country kind of ballad feel to it, but the subject matter is absolutely hilarious. And so, yeah, I think I'll just read. I didn't write down all of the lyrics, but I wrote down like the first couple of verses. So I'll just read it in poem format. But it starts off as,
pretend that you're gazing into my eyes as you say these words.
There are friends. There are acquaintances. But who you gonna call at 4 a.m? Like a friend who will hang out down at the Waffle House when you're trying to sober up from the night before. Everybody needs a friend like that. One to share his last six-pack. A friend who'll be there forevermore. You need someone who can make you shake the blues. Brother to brother, a friend through and through. Someone to talk to when you don't know what to do. Someone who will take a bullet for you. It is
Brian.
amazing.
Amen.
And this is all, the song goes on. Like, I think they play the entire song. And so it's like this 5-minute sequence of John Deere getting ready in the morning. And it's just so earnest. And the first thing that popped into my head was that song from Team America where it's like, freedom isn't free. You know, it's like, fuck you if you're not an American. You know,
it's so literal that it's I love it. I mean, you know, and we're giving it some shit, but I absolutely love it. And I mean, it was definitely, I feel like it was where the personality of the filmmakers here shined through the most purely. This is a movie about 3 buddies. And I don't get why they're buddies, but the song is telling us that they are buddies, and I kind of loved it.
Me too. Yeah, I like Greg said, we're ripping on the song, but it fits the moment. It works in the scene, so it's fine. But it was just funny, just how literal and deliberate and step by step each of like this is why we are friends, and this is the next line of why we were friends.
Let me just say that the next time we get together in a few weeks, we're going to Waffle House
to sober up from the night before.
Right.
But I mean, would you take a bullet for me?
Is it a hollow tip or is it a cop killer?
I mean, all I can say is that you wouldn't get shot in your bum knee that you hurt during the big game in high school.
I think you know me well enough to know there was no big game in high school. I worked on the newspaper. The other detail about this scene that cracked me up is that it's awfully fucking bright outside for 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, as soon as he steps outside, it's very bright. But while this music is playing and we see John Deere getting ready, first of all, I love that he has like a little lunchbox that he brings with him before he grabs the rifle off the wall in the garage.
I hope there was a little note in there from his wife. Turn the fucking light off.
There is like the weight of the world is on this dude's shoulders as he's like getting out of bed and getting ready. And it's like, exactly what is the big deal about killing this buck? Like you are waking up to go hunting with your buddies. Like that's it. And okay, maybe there's some added drama that you're going into the Camp Crystal Lake woods, but like he just looks so defeated and he's just like he's going into war. And it's just like there's a little bit too much drama placed on this moment for what's about to happen.
Yeah, I feel like the way this scene is playing, this is his last ditch to save the store. And they haven't really established that. They've established that things are troubled. They've established that things are going downhill. But it feels like this scene makes it seem as though if this doesn't pan out, the store is closing tomorrow.
I'll buy that. And I wish they had kind of said that a little bit more. We've been told 100 times that the town is going to shit, but maybe even just like one scene where he's like closing up shop and he says, he calls his wife or something. He's like, yeah, another day where, we didn't get a single customer, or just something that says like things are really are doom and gloom. And
right. Or like the night before, he and his wife are having dinner and he's telling us, he's telling her that he's going out hunting with this plan. And she's like, our final house payment, like if we don't make this house payment Monday, we're losing the house. And, I don't have any better ideas, honey. This is our last chance. And she's like, well, okay, but as long as you don't turn the light on when you leave, I'll support you. And
as long as you make your own lunch.
Right.
Yeah, just a little bit more context would have been nice. We do get another scene of the three of them sitting in the front of the truck, motionless, talking about what's going to go on. And they're basically just yammering on about how going into the woods is a bad idea. And I think it was Moonshine brings up a story about some dude named Trapper Bill. Sounds like a G.I. Joe character who ventured into the woods near Packanack. He specifically mentions Packanack.
On the other side of the lake?
Yep.
Because everybody always fucking picks Packanack.
He got lost for a couple of days, and when the cops found him, he was mumbling about someone chasing him in the woods. So that's kind of like the first indication of Jason potentially being out there. I wish they had taken it like one step further and made it like Chrissy's story from part 3, where he also got sexually assaulted by whoever was
Oh no,
chasing.
Trapper Bill. Oh no.
Trapper Bill got trapped.
I don't think Jason swings that way. I mean, if he does, like it might be any port in a storm. But I
think Jason takes whatever opportunity he can get.
Okay, fair enough. I always saw him as more of a pussy hound, but maybe not. I mean,
so the three of them actually leave the pickup truck, and each of them has a rifle, and then Mickey also brought a handgun as like a backup.
Yeah, like a 1911, which was, I'm like, okay, he's got some,
Yeah.
They step over the barbed wire that designates the forbidden areas of Camp Crystal Lake. And as soon as they step over this, the music stops. Mick helpfully points this out, that there's no sound whatsoever. The birds and the bugs and the wind immediately cease, and it's completely silent.
That's a little too Blair Witch for me.
Yeah, agreed.
It's like it was starting to get a little too mystical. Like we've already established one mystical element with Mrs. Voorhees potentially being a deer, and now it's like the sound of the world literally stops when you step into the woods of Crystal Lake. And I was like,
Right, like the area itself is cursed, and that's not...
Yeah. Fortunately, they don't take it any further than this. Like, that's like kind of the only reference they make to it, so they don't make a huge deal out of it. But when it first happened, it was just a little jarring. I'm like, well, all right, that's a little weird, but okay.
And then we get into some strange time compression, because they're pretty much already at the ruined camp the next time. When it cuts away to them, and they're at the ruined camp already. And we find out later that it's a little bit more of a hike than that. So it's playing with convenience of geography in this movie quite a bit. But they're prowling around the campsite looking for evidence of this deer. And they're kind of peeking in cabins and stuff. And in one, they find evidence that someone has been living there. There's bed and some, basic facilities and like a teddy bear. And it's very clearly, as we know, we're watching a Jason movie because it's in the title, where Jason has been living. And it took me a second. I'm like, well, this doesn't look like his shack at all. Like, his shack was much more run down. But he wasn't living in the shack yet. This is the camp. He's still living in one of the cabins, probably where he lived as a little boy before he drowned.
That's a good point. Yeah, I just thought it was just the lack of having a shack set, and so they just used one of these rundown cabins. But that makes perfect sense that this is kind of like the first home that he establishes, and then there's probably something, potentially these events, that scared him away from the camp from good and deeper into the woods to build his own shack
on the other side of the lake.
Yeah, in more seclusion. Yeah,
right. And then if you want to talk about Friday the 13th fan film drinking games, every time someone discovers Camp Crystal Lake sign laying on the ground under some leaves, take a shot, you will be in the hospital.
Bingo. Yeah. Drone shots, Camp Crystal Lake signs, and what was the other one?
Tits? No.
Yeah. Yeah, we've only seen boobs in one fan film. It was the
good one.
the one in the English Guys.
No. Really?
Oh no, you're right. Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah,
it had to be the one with Diana Prince in it.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, that was the one. You're right. We get a shot of Jason stalking his prey, and I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of seeing Jason being sneaky. Like Jason doesn't hide. He like approaches his prey head on, and so he's kind of like hiding behind a tree, and then he like runs out, and he's like hiding behind another tree and peeking around, and he's like, it's just a little too sneaky.
I don't know, man. If you watch part 2 again, there's a lot of POV shots of him kind of, reconnoitering the campsite, and he's peering around trees, and he's watching people. He's not actively stalking them yet. He's just kind of gathering intel.
Well, maybe that's the difference. Maybe seeing that from a POV shot is what sells it, but seeing a third-person shot of Jason peeking around a tree is just kind of silly. He's like, peekaboo.
Yes. It cracked me up. There's one shot of him like running past Mickey on a hillside, and it made me laugh out loud because it looked so absolutely ridiculous, let alone the fact that Mickey would see him doing this. But it was just like...
Exactly. Yeah, I actually wrote that I was like, he's probably giggling as he's running by because he's like so close to Mickey and Mickey doesn't see him. He's just like...
Yeah. And at this point, we are literally going around and around in circles. They are arguing about whether they should be there. They keep, Mickey keeps saying he hears something, and they keep saying, well, we're going to wait 20 more minutes, and then we'll check over here, and then we'll leave. And then they go over there, and 20 minutes later, they're like, no, we're going to check over here, and 40 minutes from now, we'll leave. And it's just like this it's like a bad dream. It's basically like a bad dream. Like where that hallway in Poltergeist stretches out in front of JoBeth Williams as she's trying to run and save her children, and it gets longer and longer in front of her. That's what this movie feels like.
Right. It goes back to your point of there's no reason why this movie needed to be 80 minutes. Like you could have tightened this up into like a pretty solid 45-minute top movie.
Yep. Maybe an hour. Like I'll give it an hour, but this needs to be a lot tighter. And I mean, Mick, who, for all his flaws at this point, feels like he's my favorite character. He keeps threatening to leave, and I kept screaming, just leave, just fucking leave. You've had enough. Why are you sticking around? And I don't get it.
That's a good point. There's no real reason why the three of them have to be involved in this little caper. Like they don't all benefit from this. It's just
right.
It's just a reason to bring them all together, which is fine. But
or like they can cover more ground with 3 people, but at this point, one of them is a liability. So just like cut bait, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think right when they get out of the truck, they talk about not wanting to split up more than like 40 yards apart or something, which fine, makes sense. But like that whole conceit gets abandoned almost immediately, and it seems like they're shoulder to shoulder the entire time. But I will say I liked the camp. I'm assuming it's a real camp unless they built all these cabins, but I was imagining walking through the woods and stumbling upon this, and I would be creeped out seeing these rundown cabins because it is kind of overgrown, and the cabins are separated quite a bit, and so they're just kind of like scattered in random places around the woods, and it doesn't it's hard to kind of get a layout of it. It's just like every once in a while you look around and there's a cabin over there and there's a cabin over there, and there's no like clear paths because all the leaves have fallen, and so it's just hard to kind of get an idea of where you are. And I could see how it would be disorienting because all the cabins look the same and they're all kind of just tucked away into the trees. But I liked the setting. I wish they had capitalized on it a little bit more, but I liked the initial approach into the campground.
Yeah, agreed. And the disorientation kind of adds to what they're going for. And I dug that a lot. I really like the woods that they're working with in this movie. We talked about that in one of the other movies where it didn't quite feel right. And this is what I would imagine a Friday the 13th movie would look like in the woods. And I liked that part a lot.
My first reaction when I saw the cabins and how similar they looked and how far apart they were is I was really hoping that they were going to do something like that or with that. So like someone was going to be in one of the cabins, but they didn't know which cabin it was because they got separated. And so they had to kind of like, kind of like a hat game where it's like, which cabin are they in? And then they go into the wrong cabin. And instead of Mickey being in there, it's Jason or, something like that. They just didn't do a whole lot with the cabins themselves.
Or they're trying to find the car keys and the gas can, and they're
right. The battery for the boat. They other than the cabin that Jason's living in, I don't really feel like they go into any other cabins, do they?
They might, but it doesn't make an impression. It's really more about the atmosphere, which I liked a lot. We talked about the acting at one point, and there are a couple of scenes now where it's the three of them standing around yelling at each other, and they keep pointing at each other, and that's such an artificial gesture. Like, have I ever pointed at you when we've been talking about something? That's not something I do when I'm actually talking to a person, except right now, which I'm doing on camera for emphasis sake.
Yes. Well, there's also a lot of moments where they're referencing the people's names. John Deere, why do you got to be such a dick? Oh, shut up, Mickey. Fuck you, Moonshine.
Well,
it's like,
Brian, that's a perfectly valid way to keep your audience engaged with each character, Brian.
I agree, Greg, but you got to remember, Greg, that you're not in high school anymore, Greg, okay?
Well, but if I was in high school, Brian, I would be making all of the important football plays and be the king of the school, Brian.
That's a very good point, Greg.
So Mickey splits. He's had enough. He finally bails, and he's going to march his way back to the truck and wait for them there. And almost immediately, he's creeped out by all the sounds that he hears behind him, and the snapping twigs and the crumbling, the crunching leaves and stuff. And he's armed with his rifle, which he keeps swinging around, hoping to point it at whatever threat he feels is approaching him. But I'm like, at that point, why wouldn't you switch to the pistol? You've got a close range weapon in your waist belt, your waistband of your pants. And that's better for like an emergency situation where someone's rushing at you. You can't aim a rifle. You've got to pop off 12 shots with your 1911.
Yeah. So at this point, Jason does show up, and as Mickey is trying to escape, we see Jason kind of stop in his tracks and struggle with the voices in his head, which is his mother talking to him, which is really, really dumb. We've talked multiple times throughout these fan film reviews about how we're getting a little tired of the trope of Mrs. Voorhees being in Jason's head the whole time. Like, I get that it was established in the original movies, but coming back to it over and over again is not my favorite thing. And reinterpreting it in some ways has not gone over very well. And this is one of the ways where he's just like, I can't take this anymore. I'm struggling with this madness in my head. And he's literally like holding his head and like shaking his fists. And it's like, no. We do not need to see this.
That doesn't make any sense. Fine. He hears his mother's voices. I'm tired of it, but it makes sense within the time period of this movie that we're watching. But he was never tortured by that. he was always fully on board with it. He's not wrestling with the moral implications of doing his mother's bidding. I don't get what they were trying to introduce there at all.
Yeah, it turned him into more of like a Frankenstein's monster or something, where he's just
Yeah.
like, I can't control this power any longer. And
Yeah, no, I didn't like that.
yeah,
I do like that he pulls Mick's tongue out. That was pretty awesome.
some of these kills, and there's not many of them in this movie, but I kind of like how hilariously dragged out a lot of them are. Like in this case, his tongue is dragged out of his mouth, but how long they kind of drag out the actual killing scene. And I feel like Jason is pulling on Mickey's tongue for like 5 minutes, and he's just like really struggling. He's like, come on, come on, come on. And finally it's just like, it just comes out. And so I like that. Yeah, that was a decent kill.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like
Actually, that actually didn't kill him, but yeah.
Right, he gets a machete to the back of the head, which is also a nice effect. I feel like they were trying to set Mickey up as like a chatterbox, like the guy who never shuts up, and so pulling his tongue out was like sort of a poetic kill. I don't know if they leaned into that hard enough, and I feel like it might have been too obvious if they had. But yeah, it was certainly different. I'm not sure why Jason would have chosen to do that, but it was certainly different and well executed.
Yeah, I like the take of him being the chatterbox, but it's not entirely true, because all three of them won't shut up, and they're all constantly giving each other shit. So
Right.
there's no one guy that's more guilty than the next. But yeah, I always like the overly elaborate Jason kills, where if you kind of take a step back and be like, why would he do this? Like, Jason is an efficient killing machine. He would want to do something to dispatch someone as quickly as possible, and pulling out the tongue is not going to kill him. So like, that's just stage one. And then, yes, it shuts him up. It prevents him from screaming, I guess. But it's just like, why wouldn't you just kill him with the machete right from the beginning? Like, and I'm not complaining. As like a horror movie fan, like you want to see these things. You want to see that gore. But when you stop to think about it, you're like, no, why would he do that?
Yeah, what's he getting out of this? I mean, especially if he's tortured by his mother's commands. We cut back to the other guys who are marching along the woods, continuing their hunt. They're not looking for Mickey at this point. They're not talking about abandoning the plan quite yet. They're going to give up eventually, but they're not like headed on their way back out. However, they stop and chat and find a shell casing and blood right where they happen to be standing. So this is where Mickey was running to leave, and they've now stumbled upon that exact site. I also think I heard a plane fly overhead.
So you're not watching M. Night Shyamalan's The Village?
Dear God, no. Why would I do that?
Yeah, you were smart.
Now that they've discovered evidence that something has gone wrong with Mick, Chuck proposes a plan of action where Bo, the what are you calling him? Moonshine?
Moonshine.
We'll go back to the camp and see if Mick is there for some reason. And Chuck, who is John Deere, will go back to the truck. But it's going to take him a while to get there. He's got to hustle through the woods to get there. And I think he says it's going to take him an hour or so. But he says that they'll reconvene in half an hour back at the camp. So I don't get the timeline here, because it's going to take Moonshine a while to hobble his way back with his bad knee to the camp. John Deere is going to have to run to the truck and then drive the truck to the camp.
I think John Deere mentioned that the truck was an hour away, but he could get there faster if he booked it.
Okay.
So let's just say he runs and does it in half an hour. But you're right. We don't know where they are in proximity to the camp or the truck. We know that they're an hour from the truck, but how far is the truck from the camp? So
more than an hour.
Well, right, depending on which direction you're going, I guess. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I think they made this overly complicated by making the truck so far away. It could have just been like, look, the truck is over in that direction and the camp is in the opposite direction. We'll both head to those two, and then we'll meet in the middle in half an hour or something.
Well, you can drive to the camp. We saw the police officer do it in part one. So I don't get why they're hiking all this way to begin with, other than if like the road is blocked off or they don't want to spook the deer or something. But it's just like you can drive to Camp Crystal Lake.
Greg, you don't understand these guys. They were top like big men on campus in high school, and BMOCs are not going to drive a truck through the woods. They're going to hike like men, and they're going to relive their glory days. And so the sooner you realize that, the more this plan makes sense. I don't know why you keep resisting it. It's like how you were in high school when you were always so reluctant to do things, and now you're still doing that stuff. So like, get out of the glory days, buddy. This is present day.
You would have convinced me if you had said my name and pointed at me more.
I'm sorry, Greg. So whatever this plan is, they split up, and Moonshine, who is struggling, this is one of the backstories that does kind of pay off, is that Moonshine
His arthritic knee.
Yeah, he's got this bum knee, so he can't move as easily, so he has to take a break, and he lights up a stogie. And as he's kind of like resting against this rock, he turns around and sees that Mickey's body is back there. And Moonshine freaks out and does one of these like, I'm disoriented.
Mary Tyler Moore twirls. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
like I'm disoriented, spinning around, moves, and like the camera's spinning around him. And then he starts to like slowly hobble away. And that's when we cut back to John Deere.
No, at first he trips on the barbed wire. On another barbed wire, and hurts his knee even worse than it already was.
Yep. Good point.
So there's a lot of barbed wire in this movie.
Yes. And not the Pamela Anderson kind.
Too bad.
So then we cut back to John Deere, who's back at the truck. So however, much time has passed, he's back there.
Yes, and oddly panicky. Even though he should be more curious why Mick isn't at the truck. He's expecting to find their friend Mick there. But he makes it seem like he already knew Mick wasn't going to be there. And he's like all jittery and freaked out. So that seemed odd to me.
True, yeah. We get the classic horror movie trope of the truck not starting, which I commented out loud because it was like some old Ford pickup truck. And I said, built Ford tough my ass.
Here's a question. Jason is very good at disabling vehicles. Do you think he can fix them?
Oh, interesting. Like, could he start his own like Voorhees auto body shop?
Right.
No, because I think Jason is an instrument of destruction and not repair. So it would be like Jason's destruction auto body shop. But yeah, he can like just go in and grab something and be like,
he knows what to take out, but he can't reinstall it.
Yeah, like if I yank these wires, it's going to do something bad. Or if I pull out this thing, it's going to, cause something to work. But yeah, he probably knows just as much about cars as I do, which is that he pulls out the flim flam or the crank whistle or something and says, like, this will do the trick. But
please don't pull out your crank whistle.
Not again. I learned that mistake the first time. But yeah, so John Deere is the one that realizes, like, he pops the hood and realizes that something has actually been ripped out. And
right. So now he's got to run all the way fucking back to the camp, which he just came from. So he's having a rough day.
Yeah. So Moonshine, who is now trying to catch his breath against a tree, gets greeted by Jason, who garrots him with some barbed wire, which I don't know if it's the same barbed wire from that he tripped over, or if Jason's just carrying his own. But
got his own spool of barbed wire he carries around in his backpack.
But it's a pretty cool
because he uses it on Crazy Ralph in part 2.
That's true, yeah. But it's a pretty cool kill.
Yeah, it's pretty sustained, and I mean, like everything else in this movie, but in this case, it really works because it's digging into the guy's neck, and it's blood is oozing out, and I think you even kind of see some torn flesh and stuff, and it's great. I loved it. It's a bad way to go.
Now we're just left with John Deere, who's now running into the woods to find Moonshine. And what's weird is he starts yelling for Moonshine, like out loud, and saying to head back to the camp. And I don't understand why they didn't yell for Mickey when they couldn't find him. Like they just saw like blood on the ground and they're like, oh my God, where is he? Like he could have been 20 yards away for all they know, but they never were like, Mickey, where are you? And then like when they didn't get a response, then they decided to do a search. But maybe this just proves that Mickey was never really a close friend of theirs and they didn't care all that much that he was missing. But
yeah, he could have been like, like he was behind a rock, like barely conscious, not thinking anyone was close by. And if they'd yelled his name, he would have been like, guys, I'm right here. And they would have saved him and everything would be fine. But John Deere makes it back to the camp and begins exploring. And in one of the cabins, in the cabin where Jason was sleeping, finds the shrine with an absolutely terrible fake head of Pamela Voorhees. I almost said Pamela Anderson because of your earlier joke. That would have been equally good. I hear she gives good head. That's not fair.
Would have been a different shrine too.
Right. But it looked like a mannequin head with a wig on it. It was pretty rough. But then he finds the bodies of his two friends as well. So we know for sure that they've been killed and laid at the feet of Pamela Voorhees, much like all of the victims from part 2.
Which is one of those like time discrepancies that kind of bugs me because Mickey was hiding, or not hiding, his dead body was behind the rock when Moonshine found him. So why hadn't Jason disposed of the body yet? Or did he just know that Moonshine was nearby? And so he's like, I'm going to wait till I kill Moonshine as well. And then I'm going to carry both of these bodies back to the cabin. But
Right.
it's like, it's hard to kind of tell how much time has passed other than what John Deere told us of how long it was roughly going to take him to get to and from the truck. But like,
Right, which means that Jason can book it through the woods much faster than John Deere can, which is kind of funny. Like, I think he's probably got both bodies over his shoulders like potato sacks, and he's chugging through the foliage at top speed. I wish we could have seen that.
That would have been nice.
John Deere has reached into the waistband of his dead friend Mick and taken that pistol. So fortunately for him, because Jason surges in the door and grabs John Deere and then hurls him out of the cabin. And using that pistol, John Deere manages to get some shots off and shoots Jason in the shoulder and then books it hoping to reach safety. But he pauses to rest, only to find Jason standing several yards away. He fires a bunch more and misses every time. We get another classic shot of Jason swinging the machete and having it lodge in the tree because he's missed, which allows John Deere to get off another couple of shots, and Jason is shot in the knee, even though he's walking around just fine moments later.
It definitely doesn't seem like it slows him down at all, but it creates enough separation between John Deere and Jason that John Deere is actually the first to spot Jason, and he's probably like, 50 feet away in the woods, and John Deere has Jason dead to rights in his sights of his gun, which is kind of cool because you don't necessarily see someone get the jump on Jason too often and catching Jason off guard. So I like the idea that he's like, I got you, son of a bitch. And he pulls the classic mistake of waiting too long. But in addition to waiting too long, he also steps on a tree branch or something and creates like a little bit of a clicking noise that gets Jason's attention. Jason turns his head toward John Deere and chucks his machete. It probably 50, 75 feet and just goes flying through the air and nails John Deere right in the chest.
Which is awesome. It pins him to the tree, that was a great, I kind of did a little clap. I thought that was great.
I like that too.
Jason then goes in for the kill and disembowels John Deere while grunting like he's forcing out a big poo after breakfast at the diner.
This is one of those prolonged kills that, in this case, I felt like it went on too long. It was just like, you said.
Yeah, and I don't, we hear Jason make noises occasionally, but I feel like this was leaning a little too much into that. There's a fine line. And I don't think that there's right or wrong, but I feel like it made him a little bit too human. So, I mean, personal choice.
One element of this kill that I really liked was that as John Deere is struggling with Jason, John Deere is like firing off wild shots with his gun. He's not anywhere near Jason. He's trying to get the gun close to Jason, but he's just firing off shots. And he finally is able to get the gun pointed directly at Jason's temple, and he pulls the trigger and he's out of ammo.
Click. Yeah.
That was a really cool, like, oh, you were so close. Right. Just one more shot in the barrel and you would have had him.
But would it have stopped Jason?
Well, we know that no, it would not have, but
absolutely. Like, for all, he was trying his best, and it was, if it had been successful, he would have been satisfied. But would Jason get taken down by a shot to the head?
Yeah, we haven't seen many point blank shots on Jason in the movies. We've definitely seen him get shot, but it's usually from like across the room where he gets grazed by something. But like a point blank shot to the temple,
right? And I think he takes a hit in the forehead in part 6, like over that little red crest on his hockey mask.
Yeah,
but it's from a distance, and I don't know that it penetrated like between the mask and his thick dome. I don't know that it would have gone through. But
right, you could have argued.
Shot,
yeah, because the temple shot, there's no mask in between to potentially slow the bullet down or whatever. And
well, the sack. I mean, he's got the protection of the sack.
Well, right.
So yeah, John Deere is dead, and as a little thematic closure, we get a nice poetic shot of Buster the Buck striding through the woods. He has lived to scamper another day in the wilderness.
What I don't understand, though, is like after Jason kills John Deere, he just walks away. Like, why didn't he pick up the body like the other two? That's where we could have gotten that cool shot that you mentioned, Greg. As I point to you and say your name again, Greg.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome,
I appreciate
Greg.
it, Brian.
But like dumping John Deere over his shoulder and like walking off the camera, like that would have been a pretty cool shot, Greg.
I also, Brian, would have enjoyed a shot of Jason walking over to Buster the deer, as though they have this like little understanding. Like, why wouldn't Jason have not hunted down Buster the deer for food? But like maybe they have this like little wilderness understanding, almost like Bambi and Thumper, where they scamper around the woods together. Jason maybe even rides Buster,
or it just starts fucking her.
Maybe. I mean,
right.
Or other way around.
The funnier sight, other than Jason fucking the deer, is Jason riding the deer off into the sunset.
Right, like he rides it over to Packanack. I mean, it's on the other side of the lake, so.
Oh, that would have been amazing.
Instead, we cut back to the opening of this movie where the sheriff has arrived at the entrance to the trail, and it turns out he's comforting John Deere's wife. She's, alarmed that her husband hasn't come back from this hunting trip yet, and the sheriff knows something's up, so he wants to try and keep it all quiet, but he arranges a little, search party and posse to go marching off into the woods and hunt down, find the guys if they can, but hunt down whatever may have happened to them. And that crazy guy Mac is there, giggling like an idiot and causing all sorts of problems. I'm not sure what the hell he's doing there.
That was a weird turn for Mac, because he was supposed to be the voice of reason at the beginning, where he, like, the story that he told ended up being true theoretically, and to turn him into this like loony like guy at the end where he's like giggling maniacally and running around in circles, and it's like, well, you're completely undercutting the validity of this guy's story. And it's like, so I didn't understand that turn for that character. The more logical thing would have been had Mac at that search party event saying like, I told you that this was going to happen. Look what happened. Right. But instead they turned him into the crazy Ralph character for some reason.
And I feel like they also could have gotten like a tall, thin guy to put a little, battered hat and a vest on, and shoot Crazy Ralph from behind. Like, it doesn't, it's not going to be Walt Gorney. He's been long dead, R.I.P. But they could have at least, had him there too or something. And yeah, like, this dude just seems like a nutcase.
Yeah, it was a weird turn that I didn't understand. And I do like the idea of Crazy Ralph there, even if you just see him kind of like riding off in the background.
Like, oh, I told you, I knew it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, don't introduce, I mean, even though we never saw him, don't introduce Crazy Ralph, but then have a Mac character that essentially does the same thing. It's like,
yeah, Crazy Ralph felt to me like a drunk who was also maybe like a well-meaning Christian fundamentalist or something. And this dude, this Mac guy, seems like the dude that turns into Chucky in the Child's Play movies. Like, he's just like this maniacal little elf who's,
yeah,
he's too crazy. He seems scarier to me than Jason.
Agreed.
And we get another long scene of John Deere's wife sitting in the back of an unmoving police car talking with one of the deputies, covering much of the same ground that we just spent the previous 73 minutes covering. But we do get a pretty good ending where the sheriff says, "Okay, Jason, if you're out there, we're going to put you to bed." Slide racking the shotgun. So they're going to go in and hunt Jason down.
Did you happen to see, before we get into final thoughts, did you happen to see the post-credit sequence?
Yep.
Okay. So I do like what this is setting up with the search party, though, because you get John Deere's wife in the back of the police car, who John Deere, by the way, totally outkicked his coverage when it comes to his spouse.
Yeah, he did. Like the Las Vegas Raiders.
Okay. But she's wondering out loud to like the deputy, I think, of like, maybe this was Jason, or maybe there is something going on in Camp Crystal Lake that we should be looking into. Like, she's just wondering if there's more to it than just getting drunk and getting lost in the woods. And the deputy's like, no. And he may not really know anything that's going on because he's kind of like the younger of the two cops that we see. But then when we do cut to that final shot of the sheriff, who's an old, like, grizzled veteran, he knows what's going on, and he somehow just assumes that's Jason somehow. So maybe there was something else that had happened that suggested that Jason had been around. But I just liked the idea of this group of like searchers going into the woods, knowing that they're probably not going to be coming out. And I feel like that's a movie in itself and a good excuse to get people into the woods.
Yes, I feel like, so what happens is we get a post credits stinger of the posse marching through the woods, heavily armed, quote unquote heavily armed. It's a low budget fan film, but this group of armed people marching through the woods, and then we get this little stinger of the pleasant woodside with birds chirping and just quiet nature sounds, until we see Jason in different clothes. He's wearing a different shirt. He's wearing what he's wearing in part 2, carrying his mother's head and sweater off to, escape this posse. So I kind of love the idea that Jason, knew this group of people was coming in to raid his shit at the camp. And he's like, all right, I'm going to go over to Packanack, and they won't find me over there. And I'll set up my little shack and my little toilet, and I'll be good.
I interpreted the scene completely differently. So
okay. Nice.
This could just be the bad makeup effects of the prosthetic head, but I didn't think it was Mrs. Voorhees' head, and I definitely didn't see him carrying a sweater. Like, that's not to say that he wasn't. I just didn't see that. I thought it was just like a random search party head, like someone from the search party that he had killed, and like it was like, look, you shouldn't have come into the woods, and this is just. I've killed one, probably all of them, and you're seeing me walk away. But if it really was, like, I prefer your version where he's like, I'm going to take my toys and go home kind of thing.
That's, yeah. I mean, he's definitely carrying the sweater.
Okay.
It's the same shitty head that we saw in the shrine.
Okay. Then I really like that then, because I just thought it was just setting up that none of these search party people got out alive. and that you're
Which would
just
also be cool.
right. But I love the idea of him like, all right, I'm fed up with all these people coming into the campground. Like eventually I'm going to get outnumbered and I'm not going to be able to take all these people on. So I need to get out of here and find shelter somewhere else. I
Yeah,
like that so much more.
this is him evading capture and allowing part two to happen, which I loved. You know, like I said, I like it when fan films kind of insert moments to bridge gaps between the existing movies, and you know, I was. It took me a while to figure out that he was living in the camp instead of his little shack. But this explained it. It's like, oh, shit, yeah, he had to move because people were going to come in and start searching the area, so he's going to the other side of the lake, and they won't find him.
It's Jason First Blood.
Right, exactly, which is a movie I want to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't even had time to think of it because I just discovered this as you mentioned it, but I really like that idea of this being like the precursor to how he ended up in the shack. Very cool.
There was one detail of the credits that jumped out at me. They had a SAG-AFTRA credit. I'm like, wait, this was a union shoot?
That's a good point. Yeah, it must have been. I mean, I don't know how that works, but I'm sure these aren't unpaid actors, but maybe when you have a production of a certain size or something, you have to get a union involved. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get your SAG card being in a fan film, that's awesome.
Yeah, that is cool. So I'm going to beat you to the punch because you always ask me first. What did you think of the movie? Greg, what? I'm just going to ask you a question, Greg, if you don't mind, Greg. What did you think of His Name Was Jason, Greg, as I point to you?
Well, Brian, let me say, Brian, I think we should talk for about 80 minutes about it at a diner. This one was rough to get through. There were concepts that they introduced that I really liked a lot, and hopefully I've called those out as we've discussed this movie. But it was a slog. It was so dialogue heavy that didn't really go anywhere. It went around in circles, and it felt way too long. Yeah, sure, some of the acting was rough, but I've tried really to not even pay attention to that in these fan films. And I kind of like the idea that it was this group of middle-aged dudes instead of a group of young, nubile campers. Like, that was an interesting spin on the concept. And they definitely established everybody's motivations, but they did that too much. So it got to be a little bit of a chore. There were some great shots. The kills were awesome. And there's a lot that I did like, but ultimately I'm like, this didn't need to be 80 minutes long.
That's probably my biggest complaint is just the length of it. It sounds like I liked the movie a little bit more than you did. There's problems with it, and I even remember like during the opening diner scene, I think out loud I was like, oh boy, when the exposition and the back and forth dialogue started going on a little bit too long. But I think once I settled in and realized like, okay, this is just what this movie is, and I just kind of accepted it, then I was okay with it. And I also think it helps that I broke the movie up a little bit. Like I watched the first like half hour, 40 minutes, and then I ate lunch, and then I came back and then I watched the other half. And so I think that
What'd you
helped.
have for lunch?
I don't remember. A bran muffin.
You fucking idiot.
Yeah, I know. But I liked the idea of people being afraid of the woods and just not being stupid and being like, no, we just don't go into the woods. And not just us, but other people too. Like they see this big buck and they want to kill it, but they're like, nope, I'm not going in there because I know there's just bad news in there. So I liked that like kind of like universal understanding of we're not going to go in there. They didn't really pay off despite the 55 times that they mentioned that the town was going to shit and that they couldn't find work. They just didn't pay that off enough. And I think they could have done that pretty easily by adding a little bit more weight to why they were going into the woods, which we talked about earlier. So there were certain things where I was expecting them to pay off a little bit more than they did, and they never really did. Like you don't introduce like a guy who is like a former football star and then not have some sort of element of that take place. I mean, other than the fact that he had a bum knee, like tackle
like,
Jason or something.
Yeah, or John Deere has to like, long bomb Mrs. Voorhees' head, right. And he catches it in the end zone and runs away. And...
Right. There's things that you could do, but yeah, I didn't dislike it. The length of the movie was the biggest part. I as much as I knock the acting, I actually think the dialogue is probably the biggest issue, because I liked these three guys, even though they hated each other. Like I was kind of like, oh, I'm fine watching these three guys go in the woods. It was a shame that Mickey didn't have more to do. I mean, none of these guys really had much to do, but I didn't dislike the characters. And I also applaud the filmmakers for not making the fatal error in some of these fan films that we've seen of just having too many characters and just for the sake of having too many kills. Like I was thrilled that there was only 3 or 4 kills or whatever in this movie. Like,
good point.
As much as I love to see a body count pile up, it's tricky to do it without making it messy. And so thank you for keeping the character count down, keeping the story pretty simple. I just wish they had kind of done a little bit more with some of the stuff, like the cabins and the just the general backstory. And, I don't know. I thought Jason looked pretty cool. I agree that he was probably a little bit too big, but it was fun to see part 2-ish era Jason again.
Yep.
Because all the other versions we've seen so far are the hockey mask version.
I'm always happy to see Sackhead Jason.
Yep.
Love it.
But yeah, it was not a complete win for me, but I it's far from being a failure.
Next time we've got Jason Rising, which sounds like kind of a, you're the man now, dog movie from the late 90s or something.
Or it's a Jason porn film.
Ooh, now that I would hear, he's going to be hanging out with that 10-point buck.
Diana Prince shows up.
Fine by me.
See how much he's rising. The good thing about Jason Rising is it comes in just under an hour. So I am looking forward to getting back into like a somewhat tighter framework of a story and kind of seeing what they can do. Because I really, and we'll probably surmise this at the end when we're done looking at all these fan films, but I'm going to guess that the ones that we like the best are the ones that are shorter and did more with less than trying to stretch it out and make it into the feature films. Because I think what ends up happening is you get these drawn out dialogues and just unnecessary storylines that you don't see. It's like, we understand your limitations. You don't have the budget. You don't have the resources to do everything you want to do. So why stretch it? Like keep it lean and mean and see what you can come up with. So I am looking forward to getting to at least the next couple of ones are under an hour. So we'll see how those pay off.
Yeah, I'd like to you and I have like a little bit of a fan film recap episode at the end where we kind of rank our favorites and least favorites. And I would suspect that the shorter ones will be we had more fun watching them. I could be wrong.
Greg, I got a good idea, Greg. You know what that idea is, Greg?
I think I know what you're going to say, Brian.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you do, because, when we were in high school, you always used to cut me off, and I really wish you'd stop cutting me off because we're not in high school
anymore. I'm older,
anymore.
and I can ring the doorbells.
Okay,
so,
but
Brian...
But here's the thing. So, like, all the cool kids when we were in high school, what they used to do is they used to go online, like to the Apple Podcasts, and they'd find our podcasts and they would rank and rate it and even leave a review and be like, hey, I really like this podcast, or I really hate this podcast. And then they would leave, a star rating, because those types of things helped, like the big men on campus, like you and I, like those ratings helped us when we were in high school. And so if you want to do that now, we could relive our glory days of being in high school. So if you have the means, by all, go out and review and rate our podcast and let people know what you think. So more people.
I love, Brian, that you bring that up. It's perfect. But anyone, Brian, who researches us will know that we were not, Brian, in high school when the internet was a thing or podcasts were a thing, Brian.
Thank you for ruining the illusion, Greg.
No, that's hilarious, Brian.
Okay. So if you'd like to hear more about our glory days in high school, you'll just have to...
Oh, man, there's this like time when I had to lay out the newspaper. It was crazy. We had 3 columns, but only like, oh, man, I'll tell you about it later.
Oh, man. I'm sure the leading and kerning was just a bitch for that.
Oh,
God.
The camp kerning.
Whatever. If you want to hear us talk about the next fan film and find out why Jason's pants are rising, tune in next time. But until then, you're all doomed.
Jason's pants.
There are friends, there are acquaintances, but who you gonna call at 4 in the morning? Like a friend who will hang out down at the Waffle House when you're trying to sober up from the night before. Everybody needs a friend like that, the one to share his last 6-pack, a friend who will be there forevermore. You need someone who can make you shake the blues. Brother to brother, a friend through and through. Someone to talk to when you don't know what to do. Someone who'd take a bullet for you. It's last call. Start a fight with a whole damn bar, and you got my back even though you know we're gonna lose. Everybody needs a friend like that, one to share his last 6-pack, a friend who will be there forevermore.